I rehearsed my vows in the mirror and never mentioned the condo because I thought ignoring a bad idea could still make it shrink. By noon on my wedding day, my sister smiled at me over a champagne flute and said she had settled for a smaller registry because I didn't believe in generosity. At 6:15, just after the pastor's blessing and before the DJ announced our first dance, she accidentally pressed her hip into the cake cart and my $5,000 wedding cake slid, toppled, and folded into itself like wet laundry on the ballroom floor. The first Monday of the month, the local news hummed from my kitchen while I checked vendor confirmations and taped a seating chart to the refrigerator. The anchor read a cheerful piece about a church rummage sale 2 miles from my townhouse and the weekend's high school baseball scores, and the noise steadied me while I wrapped ribbon around tiny favor bags. I had saved for this wedding the way I save for everything, with lists and receipts and a respect for interest rates. The splurge was the cake, a 4-tier buttercream with hand-piped dogwood blossoms and a lemon curd layer I daydreamed about when traffic stalled on I-75. My sister Jenna had opinions about everything, she always does, but she called the cake tasteful, which is her version of approval. We grew up in Cobb County where people lean on porches to swap weather forecasts and you can get to a Kroger or a church in under 3 miles from anywhere. I'm 32, a speech therapist at an elementary school. My fiancé Mark works in IT for a furniture company and watches baseball with the sound low because he likes the announcers calm. Jenna is 29 and rides the line between social media gigs and part-time shifts at a salon where the hairspray smell sticks to her clothes. I own a 1-bedroom condo close to the square that I inherited from Aunt Rita 3 years ago, a place with a tiny balcony and a fig tree that only ever produces 3 figs, which I eat right then because they feel like good luck. On the second Thursday before the wedding, Jenna showed up to my townhouse with a folder and a tone like she was about to award me something. She wore a knit dress that made her look like she had someplace to be and dropped her keys into my bowl so decisively my shoulders tensed. "I've been thinking about your gift to me," she said, and my throat went dry because I heard capital letters where there shouldn't be any. "What gift?" I asked, and she slid the folder open to a printed page with the condo's address, a photo Aunt Rita took once when the fig leaves were shiny, and a word that made my stomach drop. "Transfer. You're getting married," she said with a brightness that felt borrowed. "And you and Mark will have 2 incomes and that little house you'll buy by the beginning of next year. And I'm still paying $14.50 for a 1-bedroom with a loud neighbor." I did the math. If you transfer the condo to me as my wedding gift, I can cover the HOA and utilities, keep my job, and actually start saving. It's a win-win. Family helps family. I stood at the counter with my palms flat because I needed a surface. "Jenna," I said slowly, the way I talk to a second grader who just told me a frog lives in his backpack, "the condo pays for itself with the rent. It's my safety net, and I promised Aunt Rita I'd keep it in the family, not give it away." "I am family," she said, and the words came out like a challenge. "Then the condo is also for you," I said, keeping my voice even, "in the way that it gives me stability. Can't gift it. I can help you with a deposit on a place that costs less than $14.50. I'll even go to showings." Her smile flattened. "I didn't ask you to condescend," she said. "I asked you to show up." I took 2 sips of cold coffee before I spoke again, because I didn't want my voice to shake. $2,000, I said. "That's what I can give you. It's a lot for me and it's not the condo. You get to be mad about that." She stared at me like I had knocked over a vase. "You post about boundaries like a Pinterest board," she said, voice going sweet because that's when she's meanest. "And then you act shocked when people ask for something real." By Friday before the wedding, the family group chat had become a churn of errands and opinions. My mother wrote long texts about table runners and then, in the middle of a paragraph about napkin folds, added, "I think Jenna's idea is beautiful and sacrificial. Maybe talk after the honeymoon when you aren't so overwhelmed." My father took me to lunch and said quietly over chicken salad that he didn't think a property gift was reasonable for anyone, and that even saying that out loud seemed to be a problem with the women in our house. He folded his receipt into a precise square and stuck it in his wallet like it could help. I called our pastor to ask about a last-minute cousin who needed a seat. He said he would push the baptism banner aside for 10 minutes to make room. Mark wrapped his arms around me when I came home and said, "I love you and we're fine and I do not need a bigger house before our lease is up," which was the sentence that loosened my chest for the first time in a week. At rehearsal, Jenna hugged me in front of my friends and whispered, "I didn't tell Mom about the timeline you set, so she still likes you," and then pulled away with a smile for the photographer's test shot. I stared at the back of her head and had to count backwards from 100 during the prayer to keep my face calm. The wedding morning started with hairspray in the church basement, juice boxes for my nieces, and my grandmother's pearls clasped with my mother's hands shaking more than I'd ever seen. The florist set simple arrangements that looked like they could breathe, and my cousin ran across the parking lot with the rings because someone had left them on the microwave next to the green beans. We said vows in a sanctuary that smelled like wood polish and lilies, and when the pastor said husband and wife, Mark squeezed my fingers in a way that said he knew my knees were doing that small tremble they do when I'm relieved. The reception was 8 miles away at a community hall with a polished floor and twinkle lights that made everyone look kinder. I watched the caterer pipe last touches onto the cake at 4:30 and felt something like pride rise in me like it had a job. It was after the first round of toasts when it happened. That window where the light isn't sure if it's evening yet and the photographer is trying to make the flash look natural. The cake sat on a low cart the bakery uses to keep tiers stable before the move to the display stand. They had asked us to wait 10 minutes for it to set before they lifted it, and the DJ had promised to stall with an extra song. Jenna had been near me all afternoon, too near, and now she was suddenly near the cake, her dress swishing like it had somewhere to be. She laughed at something my cousin said, put a hand on the cart handle as if to steady herself, and shifted her weight. The cart brake clicked. The lowest tier slid an inch. Then 2, the center of gravity tipping just enough that you could see what was inevitable but your legs didn't move. Someone said no with a small voice, and then the entire creation listed to the left, groaned like a closing door, and collapsed onto the polished floor with a soft plaster sound. Lemon curd spread in a slow circle. The dogwood blossoms smeared into white streaks. The room made the noise a room makes when everyone inhales at once. Jenna's hands flew to her mouth. "Oh my gosh," she said, eyes wide like a staged photo. "I'm so clumsy, I just bumped it. I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." I stood there with my fingers tightening around my bouquet until the stems bit my palm. The venue manager moved in fast with a soft voice. The baker swore under her breath without using a word my grandmother would notice. And Mark touched my elbow the way he does when he needs me to feel where the ground is. People turned away and then back because that's what you do when something breaks in front of you and you don't want to be the person staring. "It was an accident," Jenna said again, louder now because people were looking. "The brake must have been loose, I barely brushed it." My mother held a napkin like it was going to fix anything. "These things happen," she said to no one in particular, voice pitched for a crowd. The DJ raised the volume and announced the salad course like it was a parade. I put my bouquet down and knelt, then stood again because kneeling was not helping. The baker crouched beside the wreckage and lifted a piece of intact top tier with a flat spatula to a tray like she was rescuing a small animal. "We can salvage enough for the couple and the parents," she said softly, "and I'll cut the sheet cake in the back. It isn't pretty, but everyone will get something sweet." I nodded and felt heat rise under my collarbone. "Thank you," I said, my voice coming out steady even though my jaw hurt. Jenna hovered, eyes glossy now, and reached toward me like she wanted to hug me in public. I stepped half a foot back because my dress had a train and I told myself it was about fabric and not about the smell of sugar making me nauseous. We moved the party forward because that's what you do. And if you ask me later what I ate, I'll say butter and salt, because that's all I remember. When it was time to feed each other cake, the baker brought 2 perfect slices on white plates, and I tasted lemon and sweetness and the metal of the fork, and then we danced. My feet started to ache at 11. The clink of glassware turned into a background hum, and the photographer took a picture of my parents that made them look like they were pretending to be as young as they felt. In the coat room at the far end of the hall, I leaned against a metal rack for a minute so my knees could stop noticing themselves, and my cousin Kelsey slid in through the side door like she had found a clue. "Don't freak out," she said, which is a terrible way to start a sentence. "But you should know someone forced the cart brake off before Jenna leaned on it. I think she did it earlier when no one was looking." The baker's assistant said she heard a click and then a giggle, but she thought it was nothing. The security camera points toward the prep table and might have caught it. My mouth went dry in that instant way, like your body knows before your brain does. "Security camera," I repeated, and Kelsey nodded. "The venue manager is nice," she said, "and she likes receipts. I already asked if she'll pull it in the morning. She said yes if the couple asks, and as far as I can tell you're still the couple." When the last guests left and my father hugged me like he hugs me after spring concerts, the venue manager walked over with a clipboard and a gentle expression I recognized from teachers and nurses. "I'm sorry about the cake," she said. "If it helps, you didn't make it bigger than it was, and that made everything easier." I thanked her and asked about the camera with a voice that felt like it belonged to someone's steady aunt. "We can pull the footage first thing," she said, "and make you a copy. If it shows what my staff thinks it shows, you'll have decisions to make. The bakery has damage coverage for delivery errors, but this would be different." I nodded and felt my shoulders lock and then unlock because decision is a word that helps me breathe. Jenna appeared behind her with a small face and a napkin pressed to her chest like a bandage. "I feel awful," she said, and those words never mean what they should when someone is rehearsing. "I'll go to the bakery and apologize in person. I'll pay for whatever you lost, I am so embarrassed." She said pay like a word she had learned in a class she didn't like. Back at the hotel 2 miles away, Mark sat on the edge of the bed and untied his shoes like the act had weight. "We can decide in the morning," he said, and took my hand in both of his. "You're not wrong to be angry, and you won't be wrong if you don't want to blow up tonight." I lay back on the pillow and stared at the bumpy ceiling and felt my heart thud a little too hard and then settle. At 1:15 my phone buzzed with a message from Jenna. "I know you're mad. Please don't make this into a thing. Mom can't handle another fight. I said I'd help with a down payment later if that makes you feel better." My fingers tingled, the way they do when I've been holding something too long and put it down. "No," I wrote and then deleted it. "We'll talk tomorrow," I wrote instead, because tomorrow would come whether or not I invited it. The next morning, first Sunday of the month, the church bells rang while I drank bad lobby coffee and the local news showed highlights from last night's Braves game, a high fly ball drifting just out of reach. We drove back to the venue with our faces bare and our stomachs unsettled, and the manager met us at the side door with a thumb drive and an apology for the delay. We sat in her office with a beige carpet and a stack of folded tablecloths and watched, silent, as the footage showed the prep space 30 minutes before the cake fell. Jenna walked into frame with a glass in her hand, looked toward the doorway as if to check if anyone was coming, set the glass down, reached under the cart, and flicked the brake with her index finger. She tilted the cart a half-inch and smiled like someone had told a joke, then walked away. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until the manager pressed pause and I heard the static in my own ears. Mark didn't move. The manager exhaled. "I can send you this right now," she said. "What you do with it is up to you. This is your event record." I nodded and felt my wrists go cold like I had just stepped outside without a coat in late November. "Send it," I said. "Please." The manager emailed the file, and I watched the bar creep across the screen like a slow confession. When we got back to the car, I sat with the passenger door open and my heels off and my toes pressing into carpet, and I thought about the way Jenna had said accident and then pay like a favor. I kept my phone face down on my lap for exactly 1 minute and then called my mother. She answered on the second ring with a voice like she hadn't slept. "Sweetheart," she said, "I hated that the cake fell, but it's just a cake. Don't let it ruin the week." I told her about the video, plain and unadorned, and she made a small sound and then said, Maybe the brake was loose and she just touched it. I said I would send her the file and she could decide what she saw with her own eyes. Mark drove us home while I texted the baker to apologize for the mess not being her fault and offered to pay the balance anyway. And she wrote back that we had already paid in full 3 days ago and that she would send an invoice for the salvage labor only if we needed it for insurance, which I did not. My hands shook for a minute and then they were still again. At noon my phone buzzed with a message from our HOA manager about a visitor notice at the condo because a prospective tenant had tried to take a look that morning with a key that didn't work. My stomach lurched. The name on the form was Jenna's. I called the HOA and asked the manager to add a note not to allow tours without my written consent and to please log the time. And she said she'd already done it and thought maybe I should change the locks, and I said I would. I made a list on a sticky note with 4 boxes to check. Locks, email Jenna the video, call dad and breathe. I checked breathe. First because sometimes I need to feel accomplished before I'm brave. On Monday I took the early appointment with a locksmith because there's something about a new deadbolt that steadies the nervous system. The shop smelled like WD-40 and rubber mats. The kind of place where baseball is always on a small TV over the register and the sound is off because the guy behind the counter doesn't need announcers to tell him what just happened. I brought the deed, my ID, and a paper cup of coffee that tasted like it had been sitting under a heat lamp. While he cut 2 keys and a spare I wouldn't label, my HOA manager called to say she had updated the visitor log, added a note about no tours without owner present, and saved the timestamp from that morning when my sister tried to show herself in. You'd be surprised how often families assume rules don't apply to them, she said in the voice of someone who is not surprised by anything. I told her I would swing by with a box of donuts next week because sugar is the closest thing we have to a truce around here. She laughed and said she liked the plain ones best because glaze makes her fingers sticky when she types. By noon I was at the condo with a locksmith, watching his hands move in a neat, practiced way while the old lock clicked free and clattered onto a towel. The hallway smelled like someone's laundry and the dryer's burnt lint heat. He tightened the last screw, handed me the keys, and said to keep the paperwork in case I needed to show anyone that I had hired a professional and not a neighbor with a screwdriver. When he left, I stood in the quiet living room and looked out at the fig tree like it owed me an explanation. I put my palm flat on the cool counter and told myself out loud that the worst part of a mess is the time before you decide what to do with it. I opened my laptop, pulled up my email, and drafted a note to Jenna with the video attached. I didn't write anything dramatic, just the link, a sentence that said, "For your records," and the timestamp. I copied our parents because the family chat had already turned into a place where feelings outran facts. The file loaded slowly, a progress bar creeping right while I listened to a car alarm chirp twice and stop. When it sent, my hands were steady. I breathed like the sticky note told me to. If I had expected silence, I should have remembered that silence is not my sister's preferred volume. The reply came in under 5 minutes, first a text with "How could you?" like I had crept into her house, then an email that said I was misinterpreting and that I had no right to share private footage. Mark read over my shoulder and shook his head. "She touched the brake and smiled," he said quietly, because he has the gift of naming only the thing that is true. I told him about the HOA notice, and he closed his eyes for a second like he was choosing the right tool out of a box. "We'll keep everything in writing," he said. "We don't let this turn into a shouting match in your parents' driveway." The temptation to drive there anyway and demand a meeting rose like heat and then subsided. I put on sneakers and walked a loop around the block instead, past a yard with a garage sale sign duct taped to a folding chair and 3 boxes of Christmas ornaments that made me think of Aunt Rita's habit of blushing at the nativity when the shepherds lost their staffs. When I got back, an email sat at the top of my inbox from a mortgage specialist with a cheerful signature and a request for me to confirm the details of a gift of equity for my sister's purchase of a condo at the address I own. Used my name like the closing line of a song. The file attached was a draft gift letter with my name typed where a signature should go, my condo valuation listed, and the date next Friday, close enough to sound plausible. The letter said we had discussed this for months, which made my throat feel like it had someone else's hand inside it. I called the number in the signature and asked for the person whose name was on the line. She answered on the second ring and sounded both busy and kind, the way people sound when their job is to get numbers to behave. I said my name, told her I had not promised anyone a gift of equity, and asked how she got that letter. She said Jenna and my mother had come in last week to pre-discuss options, and that they had said a family transfer was on the table after the wedding, but they needed to time things with my honeymoon schedule, which was when I realized that my mother had scheduled the bank into my life the way she schedules dental appointments. The specialist apologized, said she would mark the file as "do not proceed," and asked if I wanted her to note that I had never authorized anything. "Yes," I said, and my voice came out even. "Please put that sentence exactly there." I hung up, took 2 sips of water that tasted like whatever my glass needed me to be, and forwarded the email to my parents with a short note. "This is the first I've seen of this. Do not do this again," I wrote, and then stared at the little white box where people put apologies and explanations and felt zero need to fill it. By late afternoon, the group chat had turned into 2 cousins arguing in gentle words about who had spilled candle wax on the church carpet 3 Easters ago, which told me that no one knew what to do with the present tense. I drove to my parents' house, 15 miles of stoplights and familiar fences, past the strip mall where Jenna used to get her nails done when she had a paycheck and wanted to feel it. The house smelled like lemon spray and the roast my dad makes when holidays happen because his way of dealing with emotion is to feed meat to people. My mother sat at the table holding a printed copy of the mortgage letter like it was a hymnal and said I was being dramatic and that Jenna never meant to follow through without my blessing. She had just started the process, because that's how you find out if the numbers like you. "You coached her into it," I said, not raising my voice, and my father frowned at his plate like there was a problem he could solve with a fork. Jenna came in without knocking and sat down hard enough to jiggle the salt shaker, and for a second none of us said anything because we were waiting for someone to be the first adult. "I'm sorry about the cake," she said, and her hands were folded in her lap like she was in a waiting room. "I was mad about the condo and I did something dumb. I figured the bakery could comp you and it would be a story, and then you'd see that stuff is just stuff and the condo means more than a dessert. I didn't think it would ruin the night." My palms went hot in that way that says your body wants to run and your brain wants to write it all down. "You figured my wedding cake would be your object lesson," I said, and the words tasted like I had chewed aspirin. "And if I had given you the condo, where would you be right now? Drawing up a guest list for a housewarming I was expected to cater. I'm not your walking plan B." My mother said we all say things in the heat of the moment, and my father stepped between the sink and the counter like he was installing himself as a boundary, and I told them both I had no intention of letting this turn into a family theater. "Here is what will happen next," I said, keeping my voice low and my sentences simple. "I will send a copy of the video to the bakery and the venue manager, because it belongs in their file and I want their staff protected. I will not blast it on the internet. You," I turned to Jenna, "will email the bakery this week with a written apology and you will offer to compensate them for salvage time. You will send a second email to the mortgage officer retracting any suggestions I authorized a gift. And you will not approach my HOA, my condo, or any neighbor about any tours. If you do, I will file a report with the police about attempted fraud and I will block your number. Mom, you will not make side appointments with banks that involve my name. If you think I'm wrong, say so." My mother folded her hands and her face went pink and she said she was disappointed that I had become transactional. My father said he loved us and he did not want to see a cop at his house on a Sunday, which was his way of agreeing with me without taking either of our eyes off him. Jenna rolled her eyes like a teenager, which is a habit she cannot shake. "You like to make yourself sound like a principal," she said. "Fine. I'll write your little notes." The next morning after PTA night, I stopped by the bakery with a thank you note and a check for the salvage fee before Jenna could turn an apology into another performance. The shop smelled like butter and vanilla and candied lemon peel. The owner folded the note into a drawer and said she appreciated how I handled the floor. "We've seen worse," she said. "We've seen people toss rolls at each other and call it rustic." She slid me 2 cookies iced like baseballs and said they were for my dad because she had a son on a junior league once, and this time of year the games never seem to end. I laughed, the kind that catches you off guard because you didn't expect it to come out. Back in my car, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number, and when I opened it there was a single photo. A blurry image of Jenna and my mother at the mortgage desk, my mother's hand on a stack of forms, Jenna's mouth set. The caption said, "She asked me to keep this quiet. Thought you should know." I stared at the picture until the screen timed out and then set the phone face down because there are moments when your heart already knows what it needs to know and your phone doesn't have to be the one to tell you. The first Thursday after the wedding, the HOA manager called to say someone had asked the building super if the mailbox for 2B could be opened, just this once, because the owner forgot her key. And the super had said no, because the super is a man who likes rules more than small talk. He had written the request down, including the name Jenna gave him and the time, and put it in his metal drawer where he keeps all the things he writes down and saves like the world will someday need to be reconstructed from pencil. I drove straight from school to my grandmother's because I needed to sit on a couch that had seen people practice apologies without rehearsing them. She wore her house sweater and watched local news while I told her everything in a voice like I was reading a story to a classroom. She listened without interrupting except once, to ask if the fig tree was still stingy, and when I finished she said, "People who ask you to prove your love with property are not asking for love." She folded a tissue even smaller and then set it on the armrest. "Your Aunt Rita did not leave you that condo so people could play tug-of-war with your backbone." Friday afternoon I got an email from a name I didn't recognize. A woman who said she worked with a lawyer who handled Aunt Rita's estate when I was too sad to know where to sign. She had included a scanned note that Aunt Rita had put with the will, a letter I had read once in the fog of those days and then tucked in a manila folder I labeled, "Rita, do not lose." The note was in Aunt Rita's tidy script and said that the condo should remain in my name and that if I ever chose to transfer it I should do it, when my head is quiet and my back is straight and no one is standing between me and the door. The lawyer's assistant added that Rita had also filed a non-coercion note with the clerk, a thing I didn't know existed, and that she could email a copy in case anyone needed to see Aunt Rita's sentences in their original ink. I printed it before the attachment had fully loaded, the printer groaning line by line, because paper calms me in a way phones never will. I tucked it in the folder with the video thumb drive and a copy of the mortgage email and the HOA log, and I wrote October on the tab because I wanted to know exactly where I had been when this happened. If my life had been a neat line, that folder would have been the hinge where everyone saw the same truth at once. Families don't do hinges. They do drafts and edits and 2 versions of the same paragraph. Saturday afternoon, my mother texted that we should all meet at their house after church Sunday because this had gone on long enough. She mentioned that she had invited our pastor to stop by if he had time, which meant she planned to stage the kind of calm she prefers and use his presence as a soft hammer. I told her I would be there at 2 if everyone agreed to ground rules. No raised voices, all phones in a bowl, and any claims about money or property must be read from paper. She sent back a thumbs up and a sentence about how she wished I wasn't so rigid. I bought a rotisserie chicken from the grocery store by the stadium because I don't show up to hard conversations empty-handed, and my dad cannot resist tearing off a drumstick and calling it a snack. Mark cut celery in my kitchen and said he'd bring the ranch because decisions are easier if people have something to dip. Later that night, after the late baseball game wound down and the post-game host did that thing where he sounds more passionate about percentages than anyone should be, my phone pinged with an email from the mortgage specialist again. She thanked me for the clarity, said she had closed the file, and attached the signed withdrawal form she received that afternoon. I opened the PDF and saw Jenna's signature, and next to it, in a tight, careful hand that I know as well as I know my own, my mother's initials inside a parenthesis next to witness. The attached thread included a forwarded message I hadn't seen. The draft gift letter from earlier in the week had been replaced by a second version with my name signed, Unless you look closely and see that Aaron is spelled with 2 N's in the script someone used to mimic me. The specialist had flagged it as suspected forgery, and noted in polite office language that she would not be accepting any documents without direct confirmation from me. I felt the flush rise under my skin like bad sunburn, then drain, and then settle into something cooler. I forwarded the file to my folder and sent the specialist a thank you with words I knew would matter later. I did not sign any version of this letter. I am grateful you flagged it. I put my phone face down and stared at the dark window until my eyes adjusted to my own reflection. Sunday after church, the house was a hum of people trying to sound normal. The local news murmured in the background with a segment about the county fair and a quick note about a lost dog found 10 miles away, which felt like a story my family needed and didn't deserve. My father set out plates and said nothing about the fact that all the knives pointed the same way, which is his way of showing he is not as rattled as his daughters. Jenna arrived 3 minutes late with her hair smooth and a cardigan that made her look softer than she felt, and my mother brought in the pastor like a person holding a plant she isn't sure where to put. We put our phones in a bowl by the door, and the pastor smiled like a man who owns more than one navy blazer. He said he would stay only if we wanted him to, and I said I wanted him to if it meant we would all decide to be the people we said we were in front of other people. We know why we're here, I said, sitting at the table with my paper folder in front of me and my grandmother's pearls cool against my neck. We're here because I won't give Jenna a condo and because a cake fell and because we all told different stories about it. I brought documents. They aren't weapons. They are guardrails. I slid one copy of Aunt Rita's note across the table to my mother, one to Jenna, and one to the pastor. The room got the kind of quiet where even the refrigerator becomes a person with an opinion. Jenna went first because she always does when there is a performance to be performed. She said she had been under pressure and that she felt left behind and that she just wanted a place that felt like it could be hers. She said she had thought the cake would be funny in a messy way and that she didn't think all the way to the ground, which is the sentence of the month if we're handing out ribbons. My mother said she had gone to the mortgage office because she believed in her heart that Aunt Rita would want family to be safe, and the condo sitting as a rental while her daughter paid rent felt like a waste. She said she had asked the specialist for a hypothetical, and that people in offices write drafts all the time that no one signs. I turned the photo of them at the desk around so the print faced them, not me, because I'm not interested in making other people look at their own faces anymore if it doesn't help. Mark spoke for the first time since we sat down, his voice steady in the room. We're not going to litigate feelings, he said. We're going to agree on facts. The cake video shows intentional contact with the break. The bank email shows a letter with Aaron's name spelled wrong. The HOA log shows an attempted mailbox entry. None of those pieces of paper are about how you feel about a condo. You can be mad and still not remove a break on a cart. There is a point in every family meeting where everyone looks at the quiet person to see whether they will become loud. My father shifted in his chair and said he would like to remind everyone that he has to share coffee with my mother in the morning, and that he would prefer if neither of his daughters made the 6 o'clock news. The pastor folded his hands and said he was not here to weigh in on property, but that he had officiated a lot of reconciliation and none of it had worked without an actual apology that belonged to the person saying it. Jenna looked at me and looked back at the paper and then said she was sorry for the cake, truly, and that she would pay the baker's salvage fee and write the apology and uninstall any idea of the condo from her head. My mother's mouth set like a line she couldn't relax. I'm sorry if it felt like we went behind your back, she said, which is a sentence that should be retired from families. I should have told you that Jenna and I were exploring options. I did not sign your name. I felt the first tiny space open up where my breath could go down and come back up without tripping. We ate chicken and celery sticks in a way that told me we were all energy-storing mammals and would eat in any weather. The pastor stood up, thanked us for not shouting, and left with his paper copy of Aunt Rita's note tucked under his arm like something he was going to read more than once. I thought we were turning toward the part where people hold their own mess without passing it around, And then the knock came, 3 quick taps on the front door that made the dog next door bark and my father say, "If that's a fundraising kid, someone else answer it." It wasn't. It was a young officer with a polite face and a pad he never wrote on at anyone's house. And he said there had been a call about a possible identity concern and a wellness check because someone had reported a woman in distress at this address. He looked truly sorry that his uniform had been invited to this table. "This is about a bank file," he said gently, as if the words themselves needed to come into the room with their hands up. "No crime alleged, just a misunderstanding. We thought we'd make sure everyone's okay." My mother stood so fast her chair scraped. She said she had called because she had wanted an official to be present, in case Erin escalated. The words landed like a fork dropped on tile. I felt my own face warm and then cool. The officer asked if we needed anything besides time. I said we did not. Jenna stared at the tablecloth like maybe an opening would appear and she could crawl through. After he left, there was no way to call this anything but what it was. I told my mother I would be cutting contact for 30 days, not as a punishment but as a way to let my central nervous system have a month off from being invited to sign things I had not read. I told Jenna that an apology without a plan is a speech, and that my plan was this. She would pay the fee by Friday, email the bakery, and send me a copy. She would also send the mortgage specialist a clear retraction. And then she would drop off my spare key because I did not want to wonder who could try a lock that had already been changed. "After 30 days, we will decide if we are people who can sit at a table," I said. "We don't owe anyone a timeline for healing." My mother cried, a quiet kind where the tears don't move and the cheeks get pink, and I remember being 8 and not understanding why water changes a face so fast. My father put leftovers into a container and labeled it chicken today. Because he labels everything like a man making sense of a pantry is the same as making sense of a life. On the drive home, Mark kept one hand on the wheel and one on the center console where mine could find it if it needed a place to land. We passed the high school field where kids were practicing for homecoming and the marching band was getting louder in the same 8 bars because that's how you get better. And we didn't talk until the light at the corner turned green and then red again because the world doesn't align with your private scenes. At home, I printed the apology Jenna emailed the bakery and put it in the folder because I believe in records the way other people believe in vitamins. I brushed my teeth and noticed my lips tasted like celery. My phone buzzed with a final message before bed, from the mortgage specialist, short and to the point. "Please confirm that you did not authorize this gift letter version 2. It appears to bear your e-signature. We have already flagged and closed. Just want your explicit line for the file." Attached to her note was the PDF with my name in that careful false script, the version that would have slid through if a tired person hadn't liked their job enough to care. I typed the sentence she asked for, full name spelled right, no wiggle room. I did not authorize or sign any gift letter, any version, any date. I signed it, then added my middle initial because Aunt Rita used to say middle initials are the fence posts that keep letters from blowing into someone else's yard. I went to bed with my back stiff and my jaw tight and sleep took its time, the way a friend takes the long way around the block before stepping onto your porch. I thought about the cake, not the crash but the hour before, when the frosting looked like a calm idea and people believed that something sweet was coming. I thought about the condo keys, cool in my palm, and the way my sister's face looked when apology was the only outfit left in the closet that fit. I pictured the folder with Aunt Rita's ink inside and felt the first little click of a plan settle into place. Not revenge with fireworks, not a speech in a hall, just the quiet kind where you let the truth stand on its own 2 feet and you build a fence around your sanity high enough that no one trips over it on the way to your door. Tomorrow I would send one more set of emails with facts and times and say I needed a month of quiet and meant it. Tomorrow I would decide what to do about the wedding photographer's album and whether swipes of lemon curd belonged in a book of joys, which is a smaller decision than people think and also exactly the same size as all the others. The second Monday after the wedding I woke up before my alarm because my brain had decided it could do better than sleep, and I stood in the kitchen with socks on and watched the local news crawl through school lunch changes and a pumpkin festival 2 miles from my condo. The anchor smiled like a man told to look upbeat about hayrides. And I took that as a cue that life goes on whether or not your sister understands what the break on a card is for. I sent 3 quiet emails before work. One to the bakery with a video and a thank you for their calm, one to the venue manager with the same, and one to myself with the subject line October folder, truth. It felt a little like putting a lid on something boiling. It still simmered, but it stopped splashing where it didn't belong. At school, I sat with a 5th grader who stutters when people rush him and showed him how to raise a hand that says, "Hold on, I'm not done yet." And I kept thinking how adults need that hand just as badly. When I got home, the HOA manager had slid a courtesy note under my door. It said the mailbox incident was logged and that the super liked the new deadbolt brand because the screws behaved themselves. I saved the paper and laughed harder than it deserved. On Thursday after PTA, I found out what seems like everything is calm looks like on the surface. My mother's friend, who treats Facebook like a living room with a megaphone, reshared a vague post about weddings ruined by jealous sisters who can't stand to share, and 3 of my aunts liked it with hearts that felt like lemon juice on a small cut. I didn't respond because I could see the trap from 2 miles out, but it still sat under my ribs. The mortgage specialist called again with the tired tone of a woman who has had to explain no to people who think no is a starting point. She said someone had tried to resubmit a clarified letter through a different generic email address and she had closed it and flagged the file for a year. I told her I appreciated how she kept the fence tall, and I wrote down the time and the call summary because my folder is real now and I'm not pretending this is a phase. That night Mark and I ate leftovers while the Braves game filled the living room with friendly noise, and he put his hand on my knee when the ads got loud. "If you want to file an identity theft precaution report, I'll come with you," he said, not as a dare to Jenna but as a promise to my own nervous system, and the way he said it made my shoulders drop. We went to the station on Friday after work, and the officer at the window listened without rolling his eyes and gave me an incident number that looked boring and saved my life anyway. "This isn't a criminal complaint unless somebody makes it one," he said in a voice that didn't try to be wise. "It's a paper trail. People behave better near paper trails." I tucked the number into my folder behind Aunt Rita's note and felt something click into place. The opposite of drama is documentation, and I was finally fluent. The second Saturday of the month, I met with a young teacher from my school who had been hunting for a reliable place close to the square, and we stood in the condo's living room where the afternoon light makes the carpet look more expensive than it is. She walked through slowly, touching nothing, telling me her hours and the way she calls her mom on Thursdays, and I imagined a year in which my doorbell didn't ring with a surprise tour. We signed a 12-month lease at the kitchen counter with the fig tree leaves nodding like witnesses, and when she handed me the security deposit in a bank envelope, I felt a kind of relief that made my knees go weak for a second. I drove to the post office and filed a change of address freeze for the unit that stops mail forwarding without my ID, a small thing I didn't know existed until the clerk, who has seen everything, told me to do it. "You're not the first person to need a lock on paper," she said, stamping in a way that sounded like a door closing with a satisfying thud. At home, I ate a bowl of soup standing up and wrote a short message to the family chat that said I was taking 30 days of quiet as promised, that the condo was under lease for a year, and that any discussion about it during those 30 days would not get a reply. I told them I loved them and that I was going to practice love by not arguing on the internet. The next week brought the kind of noise that makes you question whether you're stubborn or just awake. 2 cousins texted me privately to say they believed me but wished it hadn't gotten so official. My aunt called to ask if I could be the bigger person and invite Jenna to see the condo lease so she could feel included in the decision you made without her, which made me set the phone down and breathe because the phrasing was so elegant it almost sounded sane. Jenna sent a single-line email to the bakery with an apology that read like a student trying to get partial credit, a promise to pay the salvage fee, a note that she hadn't realized how fragile big cakes are, and a line about stress making people act unlike themselves. The owner replied with the invoice and a kind sentence about accountability tasting better than frosting. I printed both and filed them. I did not print the Facebook post my mother accidentally liked about daughters who forget where they came from, because my folder is for evidence, not the temporary heat of thumbs. The climax came on the last Thursday before payday, the day every teacher is half on fumes and half running on stubbornness. The wedding photographer called during my lunch and asked if I wanted to include the cake crash in the final album because Jenna had messaged her directly asking for a funny 2-page spread, with captions about not sweating the small stuff. For a second I saw the whole thing spiral into a new way to be mocked forever, and my hands went prickly. I asked the photographer to hold the album as is and not add anything without my written approval. And then I stepped into the empty music room and sat on the riser with my palms on my knees. The air smelled like metal stands and dust, and my breathing was loud in my own head. It felt like the floor had tilted again, and my wedding was going to live forever in a book as someone else's punchline. I sent one text to Jenna that said no, and then I added a sentence that cost me a small piece of my pride. If you push this, I will send the video to every person you tagged that night. It wasn't a threat to ruin her. It was a promise to let the truth stand up without me holding its hand. She read it and didn't answer for an hour that felt like 12. When she did, the response was one word. Fine. On Friday afternoon, the mortgage specialist sent one more email with final language that felt like the closing of a book. She confirmed the file was closed, the forgery note was logged, and that any future attempts would bounce to a compliance team that sounds like it has shoes with quiet soles and long memories. She added a personal line that surprised me. Families are complicated. You handled this with unusual clarity. I forwarded the email to my October folder and then to Mark, who wrote back, "You did it without fireworks." And in that sentence I finally saw what my revenge looked like. It wasn't loud. It was precise. It made people sit in their own choices without building them a couch. I baked a simple sheet cake that night because I wanted to taste vanilla without lemon curd panic. And I brought 2 squares over to our elderly neighbor who watches baseball and calls all the players kid regardless of age. He ate his cake with a fork he brought from home and said, "That's a good crumb," and I felt something unclench inside me that no courtroom could do. The last Sunday of the month, I sat next to my grandmother at church and held the hymnal while she sang half a beat behind like she always has. The pastor made a passing mention about repairing what we can and not pretending the rest wasn't broken, and I wondered if my mother had told him anything or if the world just deals in general truths that fit too many rooms. After the service, my mother stood beside the coffee urn and asked if she could walk me to the parking lot. She didn't rush, which I took as a good sign. At the car, she told me she had returned the bank's calls and said the words, "I was wrong," and that sentence looked strange in her mouth and also like it belonged there. She said she had gone along with Jenna because she wanted short-term peace and had built herself a longer fight. She said the cake made her heart hurt because she saw my face, not the frosting, and she didn't stop it because she was waiting for someone else to be the grown-up. I set the cup on my roof and let her talk until the cup went cool. "I'm going to let the quiet month be quiet," she said finally. "After that, if you'll let me, I'd like to come over and see the fig tree and the lease you signed and ask you how your day was like I used to when you came home from kindergarten and told me about the girl who hogged the red crayon." I nodded because yes is sometimes the only word that fits when somebody doesn't push. On Monday, I found an envelope under my door with my name in Jenna's careful handwriting that she uses when she wants to convince you she's steady. Inside was a money order for the bakery fee, a copy of the email she had sent them without edits, and a handwritten note that wasn't long. She wrote that she had been angry and that anger is a clumsy tool, that she had seen the video enough times to hate the sound of her own laugh, and that she had told our mother not to ask me for things with signatures without asking my face first. She didn't ask for forgiveness like a coupon. She said she would wait to see if I offered it. I sat on the floor with my back against the couch and my knees up like a kid, and I let my chest feel heavy without calling it anything. On the last Friday before payday, I picked up our wedding album from the photographer. We had chosen to leave out the crash not because we were pretending it didn't happen, but because I wanted a book of our best true things, and the court documents and thumb drives and October Truth tab would tell the rest if anybody needed it. There's a blank page at the end because the photographer insists every couple should have space to glue in something from the first year that isn't staged. I think I'll paste in a photo of the fig tree if it ever gives me 4 figs instead of 3. Not because the number matters, but because it will mean something in our house grew at its own pace. That night Mark and I sat on the couch and watched a late game where the camera cut to a kid catching a foul ball like he had just learned what hands are for. And my phone face down didn't light up once. We ate popcorn and argued softly about whether the reliever should throw more off speed. And I thought about the 30 days I had given myself not as punishment for anybody but as a gift to the part of me that doesn't like noise. By the end of the month, my revenge had the shape of small polite actions that added up. A lease signed, a folder labeled, an incident number tucked where it can do good, a bakery's invoice paid by the person who knocked over a cake and called it a lesson. I did not stand on a chair at Sunday dinner and deliver a speech. I made a fence out of paper and decided who could open the gate. Jenna didn't become a different person overnight. She texted once about a garage sale dresser and whether chalk paint is worth the hype, which is as close to an olive branch as we do. I didn't say yes to brunch. I said maybe after the first. My mother sent me a photo of my father cutting the rotisserie chicken into perfect strips like a man who believes in order even when no one thanks him for it. And I sent back a picture of the fig tree that still looked stingy. It is not a happily ever after. It is a livable now. When I put the album on the shelf, I slid Aunt Rita's letter in front of it so the first thing anyone sees is her neat line about head quiet, back straight, door clear. Then I turned off the TV before the post-game got loud, washed 2 bowls, and stood at the sink with the window cracked, listening to a small sound from the street I couldn't name and deciding not to assign it importance. That is the kind of ending I can live with. Nothing dramatic, just a house that locks, a cake recipe saved for another day, and a calendar that will turn even if we don't.